Hi everyone, it's awesome to have so many of you here. We are almost 100 people. We are 99 people now. It's so close to the 100 mark and I'm very happy about that. The Game Success Guild is a community. We all support each other in making successful games. I know we have a lot of very experienced people on this alliance, on this guild, and some of you have been working in the games industry for many years already, working at companies like EA. I have been working at Bandai Namco, and we have people from Ubisoft as well, and from all sectors, from free-to-play, mobile gaming, over to AAA premium, and even Web3 gaming. So we have pretty much anything in this guild, and I'm really happy to have all that exchange going on and so on. Today we have a special guest, and that is Chris Coniglio. Chris and we have a little bit of history. We have been working together on his game. Chris has won a nice reward for his game pitch. And Chris will tell us a little bit more about this reward. He will actually present us that winning pitch. And then after that, we will talk about it. What is the most important things in that pitch? How did he win that award? What did he do for that? What kind of struggles did he have? And well, I hope we will all learn a lot from this. Chris, the stage is yours.
Got it. Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, so I'm Chris from Silent Factory. We recently went to Sweden Game Conference. That's in Skövde, in the south of Sweden. I don't know, I would call it the biggest gaming area in Sweden aside from Stockholm. You have studios like Iron Gate, the Valheim creators are there. You have Stunlock, V Rising, they're sitting there. A super great community down there, a really good event. And I can highly recommend it if you ever want to make a trip over to Sweden. Yeah, we were there and got invited to participate in their pitching competition. And yeah, we pitched the game and ended up winning pitch of the year. It was very close race. I think the top three were separated only by 1 point. We barely got there, but it was a really good experience. So the game is called Red Metal. It is an action roguelite, vehicle combat hybrid. The story so far: in a world ruled by an AI built to fix climate change, a team of disorderly drivers must battle through a newly restored wilderness to save humanity. Let's watch a trailer. So what's unique about Red Metal is that it combines physics-based vehicle combat with roguelike progression. And so if you think about kind of the car and controls from Rocket League and you put that inside of a game like Risk of Rain or maybe Gunfire Reborn, that's really what we're aiming for. And we arrived there with a fair amount of research, looking around to see what was out there, and felt like this was a niche where we could make a mark and not have to compete with too many other people, or too many other companies, I should say. For player fantasy, or kind of like what the core of the game is all about, is drive, destroy, and resist. So it's about driving fast in your car, doing crazy stunts. It's about destroying robots, big explosions and satisfying impacts and explosions. Resisting, so kind of that building of a resistance over time. You're sort of the spark of the resistance against its AI, and that plays heavily into the metagame, where you're going to, over time, as you progress through the game, kind of uncover more and more and build more and more this resistance against the AI. So in this pillar is pretty focused on like mastery, right? Like you want to get better at the game, you want to get better at driving. The destroying is a little bit more about the sensory experience, but it's also a little bit about mastery too. Obviously, you have to aim and shoot and do all these things. And then the resistance part is purely kind of about like more progression and a little bit of like to use Patrick's term, agency, I think, right?
That autonomy, that's autonomy.
So far, we've won a couple of awards, been covered by a few press outlets. We've got about 5,200 wish lists. We've been in a couple festivals. We have a couple more festivals coming up. We've had a pretty successful playtest. Of the people that have beta keys for the game, the average play time is a little over an hour, and about 20% of people play like 4 hours plus. And you can kind of see on this page what some various people have said about the game. So this one's my favorite down here at the bottom. This was from a live stream. The characters in the game, you have Dirk, kind of good-natured dude, just trying to get by. You've got a sheriff, sort of nothing left to lose type of character. Got a older farmer, quite tough, but also has a bit of a gentle side. And each one of these characters have their own vehicle, of course, as well as their own unique abilities, their own unique voice lines, and we really try to borrow as much as we can from hero shooters here. Games like Overwatch and Valorant, I think, really do a good job of establishing those like archetypes that different players can identify with. You can, of course, customize everything in the game. The customization is mostly done in the metagame. In Run, there's quite a deep upgrade and weapon modification system. So you sort of choose a different path each time you play. You're going to survive waves of enemies that scale in difficulty with time, and for killing those enemies you earn nanoparticles. Minute to minute, you're going to spend those nanoparticles on purchasing new upgrades and equipment for your car and getting more powerful so you can keep up with those enemies that are getting more and more powerful. There's some dynamic events that can pop in minute to minute as well to keep you on your toes. Sectors like a biome in the game. You'll eventually defeat the boss of that biome or sector, and then you can proceed on to the next one. So you'll go from the forest to the mountains, etc. And then finally, when you're done with your run, meaning you either died or you reached the end of your campaign, which is about 5 maps, you'll go into your garage, check out what cool new stuff you unlock, customize your vehicle, and ideally go back out there and try to do better the next time. So the references for the game, a big inspiration from Risk of Rain 2 on the gameplay and progression systems, Rocket League for the character camera and controls, and the narrative depth from Hades. Like, this is the ambition. I'm not saying that we're anywhere near as talented as these folks, but here's the team. Me, Klaus, David, our artist, and Magnus, who's doing the art direction. We're a pretty, senior, meaning kind of old team. So we've got a lot of experience in another industry, actually delivering 3D experiences for some larger companies. We've got some good partners. We've been backed by Arctic Game. It's a local cluster up here in the north of Sweden. House of Elias, the guys that did the score for It Takes Two, are working on the soundtrack for us, which is totally amazing. We, of course, have the wonderful Patrick Rose and Henrik as well, and they tell me when I do something stupid. As far as where we are in the overall production, we're kind of right smack in the middle of production, and we're looking to launch in early access June of next year, a 1.0 the following year. And you can see a small overview of kind of how the marketing might go. Individually, the status within the different features of the game, all of the core systems are pretty fleshed out, and most of them completed. We're always working on car physics. It's one of the things that will be worked on until the day before launch, I'm sure. Got a little bit of work to do with map generation, enemy AI. We have a combo system, so doing different tricks, sort of Tony Hawk grants you points that you use for your ultimate ability, basically. So the more you do fancy, cool stuff, the more the game rewards you. And then other than that, it's a lot of content production, sound, music, narrative, cars. Still on our to-do list. We've got to work on multiplayer and a few other systems I'm not going to dig into too much. The cosmetics is unfortunately a necessary thing because it's a car game, and every car game has to have a cosmetic system. It's just a requirement. So the budget is blah, 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 as you can see. But I've sort of broken it out here, just some really high-level overview of where the money is going, and the marketing here, which is a bit more of a suggestion. We're talking with publishers, and of course they're going to have their own opinion on how much this is too much or too little. I just specified here it's over a period of 8 months, and what I presented is just the early access version. The 1.0 costs X amount more, and then obviously we'll give you a cost breakdown if you would like to see further, but for the purposes of a pitch deck, I think this is okay. I have a few benchmarks in here. I'm breaking a bit of a rule here, I think, because all of these games are very successful. It's just I really couldn't find a lot of games that were on the lower end of the spectrum that also matched our gameplay mechanics. And, there's a lot of roguelites out there, and most of them are 2D or like pixel art type games, which don't really serve as a good benchmark for us, I think. So these were the ones that we went with. As far as our audience, the things that they like, that you have to like action games. It's very intense. So it's everybody who enjoys, that sort of adrenaline pumping type gameplay. Obviously, tight controls are extremely important, in any game, but especially in a game like this where you have a car, it's a bit unfamiliar as a controller. High replayability is, of course, key for anything rogue-ish, and innovation is very, very important for this audience as well, which kind of ties back to our USP at the beginning, where we feel that we're actually bringing something innovative into the roguelite genre. That's kind of the thinking behind the game and the pitch. Here's a bit of a recap, and that's about it. Should we start with some questions, maybe? I mean, I think this one is probably the most important. If you're sending the pitch deck out to publishers, like just it should pretty much always be either the first or second slide. Just, I don't have time, I'm busy, I'm looking at 20 million pitches this week. What's this game? Okay, then I can quickly know, is this for me or not? And just try to a breakdown of the important points. So like, is it single player, multiplayer? What's your price point? What's the genre? How big is your team? They often want to know what game engine you're using. I put average run duration here as opposed to playtime, because I think for a roguelite it makes more sense as a metric than total playtime. Whenever you have procedural games, it's a bit tricky to estimate playtime, in my opinion. I don't know if this is a requirement, but I kind of like having a log line. Like a log line is something that you would use in screenwriting to just give a summary, like what's the movie about. Having something like that that sets up your world, that sets up your characters, what your characters are up against, what's kind of stopping them, I think is really good for giving people an idea about what you're trying to create. Trailers are great if you have them, and GIFs are also really good. I would say this is probably the second most important slide. Is like if there's let's just even say that like people already bought your game and it's sitting in their Steam library. What's going to make them choose that over this other game? Or why would they play that? What are they in the mood for? When you're kind of scrolling through your list of hundreds of Steam games and you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, this, that, what am I in the mood for? Between this and kind of the player fantasy, you get a really good idea of why would you play this game. Like I just feel like blowing stuff up and creating a bunch of mayhem, and that's why I would play this game. And why would I play this game instead of like Doom or something? Oh, because I really like car physics, or I really want to play a roguelite. I've never seen that before, so that sounds interesting. Just based on feedback, talking with the judges even afterwards, I think this is probably the most important in terms of like, what is a publisher actually looking for? Well, they're looking for the thing that is going to potentially separate the game out from, the other 14,000 games that are going to be released on Steam this year. Player fantasy, I think this one is kind of important. I don't know if there's a right way of doing this. I've heard this term kind of thrown around a lot, and different people have different ideas of what it is. The way I understood it was kind of like God of War, the player fantasy is you're a god of war. And sort of everything in that game stems out of that one little sentence. There's nothing in that game that doesn't kind of scream God of War. From the combat mechanics to the story to the, everything just stems out of that, right? So it's about kind of finding what is that little like kernel that, the player, like what costume does the player get to put on, and what do they get to do in the game? What will they get to experience when they play your game? And I think that's really important for helping people understand like what to expect out of it. Traction is always good if you have good feedback. Put it on there. It shows that people are interested in the game. This one I thought was interesting because both our pitch and the runner-up pitch had these exact kind of like, rather than just, you often see the core loop diagram where it's like, okay, go out, collect minerals, use minerals to build thing, use thing to build better pickaxe to collect more minerals, and that tells you what you might do sort of in a very small part of the game, but it doesn't really give you the full scope of like what's the full experience of playing the game. So I think if you break it down like this, moment to moment, and then think about the bigger minute to minute, and then kind of more the hour to hour type of gameplay, and give that like bigger overview of like, what's the whole journey through the game, not just like kind of what's the smallest little thing that you do.
You were actually pitching your game at that time, and the pitch deck has changed a lot since then. And I, during that event, was doing the mentorship for the indie studios there, which was about game pitching, pitch coaching. So that was a match made in heaven, basically. And I saw Chris pitch first, and then I had my mentoring going on there. Then because I already knew Chris pitch, I asked him to actually pitch it again in our mentoring session. And then we took it apart. Since that mentoring session, within that year now, it has changed a lot. They have also made great progress. I've played the demo so far, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great game, I can only say that. There have been some questions. Let me read them out very quickly. Hamper says, there is not a lot about monetization models or such, which is interesting. Does that question ever come up during your pitching?
No, not really. I think we did have like the word premium in there somewhere. I think most publishers that we're pitching to assume this is a premium PC title because we're talking about digital distribution on Steam.
That is pretty straightforward, but I do remember that in the original you still said something about DLCs and so on, right?
I figure it's I don't know. There's an old Ethiopian saying, like anybody who plans more than 6 months in advance is making a fool of God or something like that. Anyway, it's like, if we get to the point where we're making DLCs, let's make some DLCs, but the first step is like, let's get the game funded, let's get the show on the road, basically.
It's a really interesting point. Usually I would say publishers would always want to see a roadmap and everything, and they want to see that you have a strategy and something in mind for the future, like DLCs, for example. But then again, if they don't ask for it, the thing is, if you talk too much, you could also say the wrong things, right? So maybe you don't say it just yet until they actually ask for that. That could also be a really good strategy, I think.
And it is kind of like briefly touched on here, like after the 1.0 phase, there's a mention of premium DLC as well as some free content. So it's there. It's just not like a big focus point. Like this deck is just all about getting them to, fall in love with the core concept of the game and believe in the business viability.
So something I brought up at our pitching session at that time. I was working for Bandai Namco in the past, right? So all the game pitches had to go through me at that time. I had to scan them. I had to tell if this game has potential or not. That was my job for 3 years at Bandai Namco. Therefore, I'm also really much aware of what kind of states you have to go through when you pitch your game. And the first state usually is the biz dev people. So you want to have the material in your pitch deck that convinces these people. And they are sometimes a bit more superficial. They are not necessarily gamers themselves. Often they are, but not always. And they just want to be convinced within at best 5 minutes or something like that. The issue with them is they don't have much time. Often they come too late for the meeting. You only have 30 minutes with them. Chris' pitch now was about 20 minutes, if I saw that correctly, I think. And it would have been possible to also skip some of the slides. I don't think that would have been a big issue if the biz dev people wouldn't have so much time, or if they asked very specific questions. Chris could just easily hop forth and back within these slides. They're all pretty simple, straightforward, and so on. That is really helpful then. So these people are to be convinced first. And I think it is great that Chris had the trailer in the beginning of the pitch deck. This is exactly for these type of people. They don't have much time. They need to be convinced right now. Secondly, the analyst. That was me at Bandai Namco. That person naturally has a little bit more time. That person will spend a few days eventually with your pitch deck and will create the analysis on that, and will say like, how many units can we sell if we actually publish that game or invest in that game. That person is not easy to be tricked. Chris had slides for that person in the deck as well. And that is the benchmarks, for example, which are important for like a first data perspective, basically, because the analyst looks at benchmarks. The analyst looks at similar games and tries to understand how many units these other games sold. Chris prepared these benchmarks for the analyst. Chris also prepared the numbers, the budget, and everything that is required for the analyst to understand how much money they could make. But then again, the analyst is not easy to be fooled. So if these numbers are not well researched, then this analyst will get skeptical and will maybe even think maybe that studio is not really realistic in what they're doing. They don't really understand what they're doing. However, I saw Chris' real numbers there, not only the X's you saw, and the placeholders. Well, we went through these together actually in the past and to refine them and everything. And then eventually you will have to face the board, the end boss of the pitch stages, and the board will make the final decision. Hopefully based on what the analyst says, but not always. The board always has stakeholders in mind. They don't always have played a lot of games themselves. Not all of them are big gamers. That can be really a problem if your pitch deck is only focusing on invoking passion in whoever you present it to. These people want to see the facts. They want to understand that it fits their portfolio, that its stakeholders and shareholders will also like it. So you need to prepare the slides for them as well. And this is especially all that business stuff. The roadmap is going to be important for them. How does it work with the rest of the portfolio and everything? So these stages you need to go through. And this is also what Chris and I went through in the really beginning when we started working together. His deck was already great when I saw it the first time. But now, to me, this is really a top-notch deck, and we can learn a lot from this, even visually. Even it's so direct and clear. It shows off the gameplay. It shows off a little bit of the meta game in a very simple way, very accessible type of way. And it has the numbers there. It has the benchmarks there. It has the engaging trailer there. Everything is there. Plus also showing off the team and showing off that even though they are not a super experienced team, they are working with some consultants from the industry who are professional and who have been working in this industry for a long time already. So is there two pitches you use at the same time, or will the deep depth dive come after this first initial pitch? I think this is a really good question. Chris, before you answer that question, if you have something like that, I sometimes recommend having this, different formats even sometimes, because when you go to a conference, you only have, for example, a Google pitch deck on the Google Drive. Sometimes you don't have the internet connection there, and then you can't really show off what you have online, and that is the worst case scenario. You can't show your pitch. So it could make sense to even have like a PDF format file there for the worst case scenario, or like a PowerPoint slide presentation, which you have locally on your hard drive. Anything like this can make sense. It can absolutely make sense to have a long version of the deck and a short version of the deck. I'm not saying everyone should have that, but in some occasions it really makes sense to have a shorter version of it, especially if people don't have much time, so you really focus on the main things. I believe sometimes, in Chris' case, I don't think it would make sense, but sometimes you have a game with a lot of, well, creative parts in it. For example, a narrative adventure with a big world where you would have to explain a lot about the creative sides of the game. In that case, it could sometimes make sense to have a deck that has all that creative stuff in it, and also a deck that focuses more on the business side of things. Can make sense. In Chris' case, I don't think we would need that because the game itself is pretty straightforward. The next comment by Robert: can you recommend any tools, websites, or gathering such data for gathering such data or benchmarks?
Yeah, I used a site called Gamealytic. I've used this one, and we did go through some benchmarks together. Patrick and I found that they're not 100% accurate. You're not going to get those numbers publicly. Publishers aren't just going to give away their numbers usually, but this one is fairly good for getting like a rough estimate that seems to be fairly accurate. I don't know, Patrick.
The data is really, really difficult. If you don't work for a big publisher, you usually don't have access to actual data. Everything you find on the internet, don't trust it, especially if it's from articles or anything like that. You can't trust that stuff at all. Something I still like to use is Steam Spy, for example. Even that is not really accurate, but if you pay into the Steam Spy founder, he still has his Patreon up, and if you pay a small amount there, only $5 or something like that, then you actually have access to the full range of the database. That is real useful data, but still it's not complete, and you really have to be careful. You have to understand how to work with that. I usually teach my clients, for example, how to work with this data, and then it can be much more valuable. But I can only do that because I saw the real data when I was working for big publishers. So I kind of have the understanding of what the data now we see on Steam Spy actually means in the big picture. Lenny still asked for the original pitch deck.
This isn't exactly the one from a year ago, but it's kind of the same. It's been sort of evolved a couple of times, but I would say, so same rough format overall. One of the main things was just like cut out all the text. Like, I don't know if you guys are the same, but like I tend to be a bit wordy, and also if you're sending this out through email, you want to get all the information in there, tell everybody how cool the game is. But yeah, it's the classic thing that, if you give me another week, I'll make it half as long. It's really hard to be concise and get your point across in few words, but it, I think, makes a huge difference, especially if you're like, there's no way that you could present this on a stage. It's just walls of text everywhere. So, but it had most of the same kind of slides here and there. I think we might have been missing a team slide at one point, but we had basically the same kind of structure, slightly different design.
Yeah, it's indeed great improvement. This really shows also that creating a pitch deck is an iterative approach. You don't just do it once and then keep that up like forever. You want to evolve it also while you're still developing on your game. Your game changes, so you will also need to change your pitch deck. Usually it's with everything like this. Also, when you make your game and everything, you often start with text, with walls of text first. And then you want to keep reducing the text and put it more and more into the visuals of your pitch deck or in your game as well. So making it more and more accessible, basically, for everyone to understand easily. That is just how it naturally evolves. But that also means you have to keep working on the pitch deck, keep improving it all the time during the entire duration of your development if you want to sell your game well.
And I think there's benefits even outside of just pitching to being able to boil down your ideas to just what is the important part. If you can boil down your core game to 3 words, okay, that's something. Information entropy, right? Basically a law that says every time that information is communicated, some of that information is lost. The more information you want to communicate, the more of it is lost. If you want to be effective and get your point across, it's almost always better to do it in as few words and as few kind of bullet points as possible. I mean, just even aligning the team around, the vision, the concept, all that stuff, it really helps to try to boil things down into those kind of pillars or vision or player fantasy or whatever you want to call it, because that's typically going to be the same thing that is interesting and unique about your game.
Chris, I have one question for you. You recently visited Tokyo Game Show. I'm really wondering how that went and how the Japanese players reacted to your pitch.
We didn't actually have a booth there, unfortunately, so we couldn't get anybody playing the game. We were part of a delegation, Games from Sweden type of delegation. We didn't get our own booth there, which was unfortunate, but the reaction from like the publishers that I spoke to there, spoke to a few investors, was all quite positive. I mean, a game like this, it's a little bit arcadey. It feels a bit more console, and I think that in Japan especially, like, console's really, really huge. So yeah, the reaction was pretty positive. A really good experience. Never been to Japan before, so.
What parts specifically do you think have improved since you and I have been working together?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of insight into benchmarking specifically and looking into like what games are appropriate, how to kind of think about the numbers, how to treat numbers that might not be 100% accurate. But then as well, just thinking about it more from the perspective of these different people who are going to be looking at the stack. What are they looking for? What are their green flags? What are their red flags? We all tend to kind of make shortcuts in our head, the little checklists that we follow. And you want to sort of fall into that checklist, like, oh, okay, this game used Comic Sans font, I'm not going to look at their pitch, or this one didn't have a team slide, I'm not going to pay attention to them. So it's just at a bare minimum sort of making sure that like the different people that are reading the deck are sort of able to see those things that they're looking for at a glance. Beyond that, you still have the rest of your work cut out for you. But at the end of the day, it's not that you're telling a story about your cool game and how cool it's going to be when someone gives you money to make your game and it's just going to be so awesome and creative and wonderful. It's about how is your game going to help these people that you're talking to earn a profit, their business? How are you going to help them? So it's just like, put yourself in their shoes. I think that was one of the bigger takeaways for me.
Gustav has a question. How has the response from publishers been in terms of traction, especially considering that securing funding is becoming more challenging these days? It feels that slide is increasingly important now.
I feel like the traction slide is pretty important. Like Patrick mentioned, like the first time we pitched this, I was just going out to like kind of see what the response was to the idea and get a feel. And that was one thing I kind of picked up on from the early conversations that we had, was that it's almost like you really need to be able to show them something that says there's people that are already interested in this. You're not going to need 100,000 wish lists or something, but you've got to have something that shows like, yeah, there's potential here. If you just come with a really bare bones idea, maybe that'll work if it's super genius idea and the publisher really believes in you, but it definitely won't hurt your chances at all if you can show them something where there's some real people somewhere that have expressed interest in the game, either through wishlisting or whatever kind of numbers you can put there, or just comments from people.
At what point during production are you looking into setting up your pitch presentation? What pieces do you want to have completed or near completed for that?
it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I would say it depends a lot on the game and the genre. You know, if it's like a narrative-driven game, for example, you might not even need a playable prototype. You know, if you're making like a Firewatch type of game, then it's about the story, it's about the characters in the world and the art style. I would focus more on those things, fleshing those out and making sure that that's really compelling, and maybe not focus so much on dev. But if you're making like a 4X game or something like that, well, they're probably going to want to see a prototype and see some mechanics in action and working. Develop whatever it is to the point where it's going to be able to communicate what the final game is going to be.
Usually what I see also is like any kind of time frames. It could be very early on when you have the game vision, but then you should also be a studio that already created a few successful titles. Otherwise, no publisher or investor will invest in you, no matter how great the ideas you have. If you don't have anything yet, if this is your first game you're pitching, you should already create a little bit more than just an idea, maybe at least a prototype. Maybe that is something that is really convincing for investors and publishers. Otherwise, pitching too early might not make sense and waste your time. So focus on development first if you haven't developed anything yet before that, and if you haven't made a name just yet. Gustav is also saying that they are trying to adapt their mobile game pitch to focus on traction as well. Gustav and anyone else, if you have game pitches to share with us, with the community, if you want to have feedback, we will have a look. I will have a look. I can give you some feedback on the Discord server. So don't hesitate to share your things, share your questions and your worries with us, and we will try to solve any challenges you are having. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there was something for everyone here. And if you want to connect with Chris, well, maybe just write him on LinkedIn or within our guild on the Discord server. So thank you very much for being part of this today. We are really, really happy to have so many people here visiting today. I wish you all a very, very nice day. And that is
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.